Has someone ever tried to make you feel guilty for choosing yourself?
You ever watch someone hijack an entire gathering just to make sure the spotlight is on them, while also making sure you feel about 2 inches tall at the same time? And the worst part is that everyone around laughs and claps like it is all harmless fun. But you know deep down it is another performance staged to push you into the background? That was exactly what happened at our family barbecue, the one moment that burned itself into my memory because of how casual and yet deliberate the cruelty felt, and it all came from my sister, Rachel, who has this way of pretending her life is one grand show while the rest of us are supposed to play supporting roles. The whole family was there, uncles and aunts chatting about old stories, cousins running around, my parents busy with the grill, and just when things seemed normal, Rachel stood up on one of the old wooden chairs, clinked her glass with a fork like she was making a toast at a wedding, and announced that she had something very important to share, her voice carrying just enough drama to silence the noise around us. She started talking about how she had been given an incredible opportunity, how she had decided to move abroad because she wanted bigger things in life, and the way she said those words, bigger things, I knew immediately it wasn't just about her career or some adventure. It was her way of saying that my life, and everything I had been doing, was smaller, less impressive, maybe even pathetic compared to the vision she had crafted for herself. People clapped, some gasped in surprise. My mother had tears in her eyes because, of course, she always thought Rachel was destined for greatness, and my dad shook his head in that half-proud, half-shocked way he does when someone tells him something he wishes he had done himself. And then it happened. She looked directly at me, paused just long enough to make sure everyone noticed, and gave me this slow, exaggerated wink, like we were sharing some private joke, but it wasn't a joke, it was a dagger. I sat there, holding my drink, pretending that it rolled right off me, but inside I could feel my chest tighten with that familiar mix of humiliation and anger that I had known since childhood. The kind that makes you want to stand up and scream, but instead you swallow it because you know if you react, you'll only give her more to work with. I laughed along with the others, nodded like it was all wonderful news, but all I could think was how predictable it was for Rachel to use a family gathering as her stage, because it was never enough for her to succeed at something. She needed me to be the backdrop, the dull contrast that made her shine brighter. The rest of the evening I barely spoke, which probably only fueled the narrative that I was bitter or jealous, but the truth was I wasn't jealous at all. I just hated the way she turned everything into a competition I never agreed to enter. While everyone was talking about her plans, about the city she was moving to, about how brave she was for chasing her dreams, I stayed quiet, because I knew something she didn't. And keeping that secret locked behind my silence was more satisfying than any fake smile or half-hearted congratulations I could have given her. I knew that in less than 24 hours, her little performance would backfire in a way she couldn't possibly anticipate, because for once I had the upper hand, and she wouldn't even see it coming until it was already too late. When I finally left the barbecue, slipping out while people were still buzzing around her like she was the star of the night, I walked to my car with this strange calmness, not the usual shaking hands or burning cheeks I carried after her stunts. I sat in the driver's seat, shut the door, and thought about how tomorrow morning was going to feel when the tables turned, when my phone, not hers, would be the one lighting up, when my name, not hers, would be on everyone's lips, and when that smug wink of hers would be the last cheap shot she'd ever land on me without consequence. I drove home in silence, didn't even bother turning on the radio, because all I wanted was to hold on to that thought. By morning, my sister was going to wake up and realize that for the first time in our lives, she wasn't the one writing the story, I was. Growing up with Rachel was like being cast in a play where she was the lead, the one everyone came to see, while I was shoved into the background without even a script to follow, expected to clap on cue and smile politely while she soaked up all the praise. And at the time I thought that was just how families worked, that maybe every sibling pair had one child who shined and one who existed mainly to make sure the shining one looked brighter by comparison. From the time we were kids it was obvious where the attention tilted. Rachel was the one with the loud laugh, the quick answers, the charm that made teachers fall in love with her within a week, while I was the one quietly turning in assignments on time. getting solid grades, and waiting for recognition that never came because apparently doing things well without theatrics wasn't worth celebrating in our household. I remember one year in high school, I worked for weeks on a science project, building a presentation about renewable energy that actually won me a ribbon at the regional fair, and when I brought it home, proud and excited to show it off, my parents congratulated me with a pat on the back, but then quickly shifted the conversation because Rachel had been chosen to play the lead in the school musical, and suddenly my ribbon was nothing more than a piece of colored paper taped to a board, while her performance was the kind of thing people will remember forever. That pattern never changed. Birthdays, graduations, family dinners, no matter what I did, her achievements always seemed bigger, flashier, more deserving of attention, and the worst part was that she knew it, she thrived on it. And she learned very young that if she made me look small, she looked even larger. It carried into adulthood in ways that wore me down over time. When I landed my first job after college, an unglamorous but stable role that gave me independence, Rachel joked in front of relatives that I was the practical one, the safe one who would probably retire in the same office chair. And while she laughed and everyone else chuckled along, I sat there silently, knowing I couldn't defend myself without sounding bitter, while she basked in the role of risk-taker, world traveler, the sister who lived loudly while I apparently lived small. At Thanksgiving, she once introduced me to one of her friends as the one who stayed behind, and though she said it like it was affectionate, like she admired my stability, I could hear the sting buried inside. The implication that staying behind was equivalent to being stuck, to being forgotten, to being less. Over the years, I stopped expecting my parents to notice the quiet successes I had, promotions at work, friendships I built, stability I maintained. None of that had the sparkle they craved. So when Rachel walked into the room with yet another story about some new adventure, it was as if the rest of us faded into the background. And maybe that is why, slowly, I started keeping things to myself, not out of bitterness, but out of a sense that whatever I shared would either be dismissed or compared to her. And I was tired of feeling like everything I accomplished was being measured against Rachel's drama. So I went quiet, and in that silence I found something powerful, because while she was busy making announcements and orchestrating moments, I was quietly building something of my own. Something that didn't need clapping relatives or parental approval to have value, something real that didn't depend on her shadow or her spotlight. Looking back now, I think Rachel assumed that because I didn't brag, because I didn't push myself into the center of the conversation, I had nothing going on worth talking about, and that assumption became her blind spot, the thing that would eventually cost her the upper hand. What my family never noticed, what she never bothered to ask, was that my silence wasn't empty. It was deliberate, it was focused. It was me putting my energy into a project that didn't need anyone's validation until it was ready to stand on its own. And that is why, sitting through her barbecue announcement about chasing bigger things, I didn't feel envy or longing. I felt anticipation, because I knew her wink was the last laugh she would have at my expense before the balance shifted. Before the story we had been living our entire lives finally flipped, and for once, I wouldn't be the quiet supporting character. I would be the one who took control without even needing to raise my voice. The truth that Rachel and the rest of my family had never managed to grasp, because they were always so distracted by the noise she created and the performances she put on, was that I had been working quietly for years on something that mattered more to me than any of their fleeting applause or temporary admiration, and I had guarded it so closely that even the people I trusted most outside of family only knew fragments. Never the whole picture, because I wanted it to be mine, untouched by judgment, comparison, or sabotage. It started as a side project while I was still clocking in at my 9-to-5 job. Something that gave me a sense of purpose on evenings and weekends when I could have been out socializing or trying to keep up with whatever dramatic story Rachel was spinning at the time. But instead, I was hunched over my laptop, researching, planning, and learning the pieces of an industry that fascinated me, one that I knew could eventually change my life if I put in enough effort, and refused to quit when things felt too big for me. Over time, that project evolved from a vague dream into a concrete business plan, and from a business plan into something that started generating actual revenue. Not huge at first, but enough to prove that the idea wasn't just theoretical, it had legs. And if I kept pushing, it could grow into something substantial. I poured my savings into it cautiously, step by step, making sure I didn't overextend myself, because unlike Rachel, who would jump headfirst into every new adventure expecting the safety net of family praise to catch her, I knew I had to build my own safety net brick by brick, and I took pride in that discipline even though nobody else could see it. I spent nights learning skills I never thought I would need, mornings drafting emails before work, and weekends testing strategies that sometimes failed miserably. But each time they failed, I adjusted and kept going. Because I knew this was the one area of my life where I wasn't willing to stay small just to keep the peace. The secrecy wasn't just about privacy, though, it was also about survival, because Rachel had a habit of mocking anything she didn't understand, and if I had shared even a hint of what I was building before it was ready, she would have turned it into a punchline, a story she told at gatherings about her sister dabbling in something unrealistic, and my parents, conditioned to see her judgments as truth, would have nodded along. So I stayed silent, and in that silence I built something strong, a company that was on the verge of signing its first major contract. A deal that would not only validate all the hours I had put in but also launch me into a position where I didn't need Rachel's approval or anyone else's applause to know I had done something remarkable. In the weeks leading up to that barbecue, I had been finalizing details with partners, watching my inbox light up with confirmations, and feeling this strange mix of nerves and excitement that I carried alone because I wanted the reveal to be undeniable. Something that couldn't be talked down or brushed aside. The timing, though, turned out to be more perfect than I could have planned, because while Rachel was busy using a chair in our parents' backyard as her stage to announce that she was chasing bigger things overseas, I knew that within hours of her speech, my news would drop publicly in ways she wouldn't be able to ignore. I had scheduled a press release, I had arranged for the company's launch to go live online, and I had even lined up coverage from a couple of industry blogs that would reach far more people than any family barbecue announcement could. That night after the barbecue, when I drove home replaying her wink in my mind, I wasn't angry the way I used to be after her stunts, because this time I knew something she didn't, and the thought of her waking up the next morning, checking her phone expecting more attention from her dramatic reveal, only to be met with headlines and congratulations about me, made me feel a satisfaction I had never experienced before. For once, the story she thought she was writing about herself would be interrupted by mine, louder and stronger, not because I shouted it, but because I had built something real, something that spoke for itself. And that is why, when I finally closed my laptop that night and went to bed, I slept peacefully, because I knew the morning would bring the kind of shift Rachel had never seen coming, the kind that doesn't just change how people see you, but changes how they will remember you from that moment forward. The next morning began the way so many ordinary mornings had begun before, with me making coffee and checking my phone, but almost immediately I realized this day would not follow the familiar rhythm of my quiet routine. Because the notifications began piling in one after another, first from professional contacts congratulating me on the official launch that had just gone live, then from friends who had seen the articles already circulating online, and then from extended family members who were suddenly reaching out in shock and excitement, asking questions and showering me with praise I had long since stopped expecting from them. For a moment I sat there stunned, staring at the screen as if it belonged to someone else, but then it hit me that this was what I had been working toward all those late nights. This was the moment where my silence finally spoke louder than Rachel's endless noise, and I didn't even need to say a word for people to understand it. By mid-morning, the family group chat, usually reserved for updates about birthdays, graduations, or holiday plans, had turned into a flood of links and messages, all revolving around me for the first time in my life. And I watched as relatives who had always defaulted to praising Rachel now shifted their focus without hesitation, posting things like, "We are so proud of you," and "This is incredible news," as if they had always believed in me, even though I knew the truth was they had never bothered to ask what I was working on in the first place. The irony was not lost on me, and I would be lying if I said it didn't feel good, because for years I had wondered what it would take for them to see me as more than the quiet background figure. And now it was happening all at once in a way none of them could deny. I knew Rachel would wake up eventually and scroll through the same flood of notifications, and part of me wondered how long it would take before she reacted, but I didn't have to wait long. Around noon, after hours of silence that felt like a countdown, her name finally appeared in the group chat with a single, carefully typed message: "Congratulations, sis. This is really unexpected." The ellipsis told me everything. She was seething, caught off guard, trying to maintain the appearance of being supportive while also signaling her disbelief that I could pull off something so significant without her knowing. Our parents jumped in almost immediately with messages of pride directed at me, and I watched the shift happen in real time. The way the attention she had so carefully cultivated for herself evaporated in a single morning, redirected toward me in a way that must have been unbearable for her to witness. Later that day she called me directly, her voice tight, her words measured, as she tried to downplay what she had seen by suggesting that launches always look bigger than they are, that a lot of businesses get early attention but fizzle out, that I shouldn't get too comfortable because the hard part was still ahead. I let her talk, let her fill the silence with her attempts to chip away at something she couldn't control, and when she finally asked why I had never told her what I was working on, I simply said, "Because I didn't need your opinion." And for once she had no quick comeback, no witty dismissal, only silence that stretched long enough for me to hear her breathing on the other end. What struck me most in those hours wasn't just the validation from people who had ignored me for years, but the realization that I didn't actually need their praise anymore, because the satisfaction came from knowing that Rachel, who had built her identity on being the center of attention, now had to live with the fact that she was blindsided, outplayed, and overshadowed by the sister she had always framed as smaller. At dinner that evening when we gathered again, the atmosphere was completely different. My parents kept asking me questions about the launch. My aunts wanted to know more about how it all worked. My cousins chimed in with excitement. And Rachel sat quietly for the first time in as long as I could remember, poking at her food while the spotlight that had always belonged to her shifted entirely to me without me having to lift a finger. I didn't gloat, I didn't make speeches, I didn't throw back the kind of cutting remarks she had given me for years, because I realized the silence was more powerful than any words could ever be, and the more I stayed calm and collected, the more obvious it became to everyone else that the dynamic had changed permanently. As I sat there answering questions, offering calm explanations, and watching my family react with awe, I felt the weight of years of dismissal lifting from me, replaced by something new. A sense of control that came not from demanding recognition, but from earning it in a way no one could diminish. And when I glanced at Rachel across the table and saw the look in her eyes, not playful, not smug, but unsettled, I knew this wasn't just a temporary shift. This was the moment the power balance finally tipped. And there was no going back to the roles we had been forced into since childhood. By the time the congratulations slowed and my phone stopped buzzing every few minutes, I had already decided that I was not going to do what I used to do in moments like this, which was to shrink myself and smooth everything over in the name of keeping the family calm, because peace that only exists if I accept being the target is not peace at all, and I was done pretending otherwise. So when Rachel called again that evening with a strangely bright tone, like we were on the same team now and the past was just harmless sibling color, I let her talk long enough to get to the part she was trying to wrap in fake warmth. The part where she said the flights were more expensive than she expected and the deposit for the apartment overseas needed to be wired quickly and the agency required a guarantor, which of course meant our parents or me, because I was in a better position to help right now, and the way she said it told me she assumed the script was still the same, that her spectacle came with a built-in bailout and I would go along because that is what I have always done. I could have said no and left it at that, but I had learned that a clean boundary lands best when it reveals a truth that has been hiding in plain sight, so I asked whether she had already tried our mother's card, and there was this pause, short but sharp, before she started insisting that she was only checking limits and nothing had gone through, and that she would of course pay everything back, and that was the moment I stopped being the sister who absorbs and started being the adult who decides. Because months earlier, after a quiet Saturday with our parents that she skipped because she had better plans, I had sat with them at the kitchen table and walked through their accounts, the small balances that never seemed to go down. The store card they did not remember opening, the balance transfer that had appeared without a good explanation, and I had watched my mother's face change as she added it up and realized that generosity without boundaries is not love, it is a slow leak. That drowns you. I had paid off the store card in full and closed it. I had set up alerts that pinged my mother's phone as well as mine. And I had called the bank with both of my parents on speaker to put a hard freeze on new lines of credit and to require verbal passwords that only they and I knew, which meant that when Rachel tried to run the same play she had always run, the one where she makes a grand announcement and then quietly uses our parents as a safety net, the net was not there anymore, and the only person who could provide what she wanted was me, on terms that did not involve emotional blackmail or whispered promises no one intended to keep. So I told her plainly that the cards were frozen because I had helped our parents stop the bleeding and that I would not be co-signing anything, and before she could explode or start crying or shift into the polished outrage she saves for moments when her charm fails, I told her there was exactly one path I would support. I had drafted an offer that put all the power back in my hands and all the accountability on her side, a short, clear agreement that I would fund the move money as a loan through my company with a simple repayment schedule tied to real deliverables and real dates, that I would not chase her for it because the payments would be pulled automatically, and that the only way the agreement unlocked was if she sat with our parents the next day and apologized for using their credit without consent and agreed to leave their finances alone for good, and if she wanted a shortcut, there was another option. A consulting role on my team for a set period with measurable outcomes, not a vanity title and not a backstage pass, actual work where she could be paid fairly for real results under someone else's leadership for the first time in her life. She went quiet in that cold way that used to make me backpedal, and then she tried to twist it into cruelty, telling me I was humiliating her and making her dependent, and I said no, I was giving her the exact thing she never gave me. A chance to stand on something solid without using anyone, and if that felt like humiliation, maybe it was honesty scraping against pride, and then I let the silence stretch, because I have learned that rush fills the gap with mistakes, while patience forces truth to breathe. The next morning I drove to our parents' house early with a folder that had two things inside, because I wanted my family to see that taking control of your life is not about choking someone else's joy. It is about refusing to subsidize the behavior that keeps you small. The first was a simple packet that set up an automatic transfer from my company to cover our parents' utilities and prescriptions for the next year. No speeches, no scorekeeping. Just stability they did not have to ask for, and the second was the loan agreement with clear lines and clean consequences, and when Rachel walked in late and saw our mother holding the packet with the utilities already scheduled, she understood, not because I said anything theatrical, but because she could feel that the attention in that room no longer belonged to whoever shouted the loudest. It belonged to whoever showed up with something that could not be undone by a mood. She signed, which surprised me less than it surprised her, because the room was different now and the old tactics bounced off the walls and fell flat at her feet, and after she signed I handed her a third paper she had not expected. A small acknowledgement that the nickname she had been using for her influencer project happened to be a mark I had registered months earlier for my company's community program, not to block her, not to crush her, but to fold the drama into something useful that helps people and cannot be flipped into a temporary stage, which meant that if she wanted to use that name going forward, she could. But only by partnering under the program's guidelines and putting real value in the world instead of extracting attention from it. When she looked up, there was no wink, no smirk, only a woman realizing that the ladder she used to climb on top of everyone else now had rungs that required balance and effort, and I did not feel cruel, I felt calm. Because the win was not that she backed down or that I won applause, it was that I had built a life where I did not need her permission, where my parents were protected, where help came with boundaries that honored everyone involved, and where the last word was not a speech, it was a structure. I walked out to the porch with my coffee and listened to the familiar hum of my phone as new messages came in about the launch and new opportunities that would take more focus than any old wound could demand. And I knew that the story people would tell about us from now on would not be the one where she dazzled and I disappeared. It would be the one where I stopped asking to be seen and started building things that could not be ignored. And if someday she tells the version where I was harsh, I can live with that, because truth is not always flattering, and the point was never to win a medal for kindness. The point was to make sure that when she stood on a chair and winked again, it would be because she had earned her place, not because she had stolen mine.